The sky split open at exactly 3:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Not with thunder, not with fire, with silence so profound that birds fell from trees mid-flight, their hearts forgetting how to beat. Across 7 continents, 4 billion people woke simultaneously, gasping, clutching their chests as if something vast and ancient had reached inside them and touched their souls. Scientists would later call it a synchronized cardiac event. Mystics called it the awakening. They were both wrong. It was recognition. Humanity's collective unconscious remembered something it had spent 10,000 lifetimes trying to forget. Dr. Ilara Voss was the first to see it happen. She'd been monitoring solar flares from the Mauna Kea Observatory when every instrument in the facility simultaneously flatlined, then surged back to life, displaying impossible readings. The sun hadn't changed. Something beyond it had. Through the telescope she watched as the fabric of space itself seemed to fold, like reality was parchment being creased by fingers too large to comprehend. Then came the light, not golden like sunrise, golden like the core of creation itself had cracked open and was bleeding through into our dimension. The light didn't illuminate, it transformed. Everything it touched became more real somehow, hyper-defined, as if the universe had been running at low resolution until this very moment. Within minutes the light had spread across the entire sky, turning night into something that had no name in human language. It wasn't day. It was revelation. In Moscow, 1,000 atheist professors fell to their knees weeping without knowing why. In Jerusalem, the Wailing Wall cracked down its center and began emanating a warmth that felt like being welcomed home after an exile lasting millennia. In Vatican City, the Pope collapsed during emergency prayer, his last words before unconsciousness: "He's real. Oh God, he's actually real." But which God? That was the question nobody could answer. Not yet. The phenomenon didn't behave like any natural event. It had purpose, intent. As Ilara watched through equipment that should no longer function, she saw patterns in the light, geometries that hurt to perceive because they existed in more dimensions than human eyes were built to process. Shapes that looked like eagles and lightning and swords and skulls, all overlapping, all part of something larger. Her hands trembled as she initiated the emergency broadcast protocol. "This is Dr. Ilara Voss at Mauna Kea Observatory," she whispered into the microphone, her voice cracking. "I don't know what this is, but it's looking at us, and I think it knows each of us by name." Then the voice came, not through speakers, not through air, through bone, through blood, through the helical structure of DNA itself. A voice so vast that planets could have orbited it, so ancient that mountains were children in its presence. It spoke no words, yet everyone understood. The message wasn't in language but in pure meaning downloaded directly into the human soul. "I have returned." 3 words that carried the weight of cosmic history. 3 words that meant nothing to most people. 3 words that made every Warhammer 40,000 fan on planet Earth simultaneously realize they were living in the beginning of a nightmare they'd only ever read about. Social media exploded. Within 7 minutes, hashtags like #GoldenSky and #WhatIsHappening trended globally. Within 15, the first blurry photos appeared from Tibet, taken by a mountaineer who claimed he'd seen a figure standing on the horizon, impossibly tall, radiating light that made the sun look dim. A man made of fire and faith. The post read, "He's walking toward us." The image was shared 4 million times before the mountaineer's account went dark. Not deleted, just silent, as if the person behind it had forgotten language, forgotten technology, forgotten everything except the need to walk toward that distant figure, to kneel before it. Governments scrambled. The UN Security Council called an emergency session but couldn't maintain order, as delegates from different nations began arguing whether this was alien invasion, divine intervention, or mass hallucination. The arguing stopped when the golden light intensified above New York City, and the figure appeared there, hovering over the harbor where the Statue of Liberty stood. He was 30 feet tall, maybe 300. Scale seemed meaningless when looking at him. He wore armor that looked like it was forged from the death of stars, ornate beyond description, covered in eagles and skulls and symbols that predated human civilization. His face was beautiful and terrible, ageless and ancient, radiating an authority so absolute that the very atoms of reality bent to acknowledge him. If you want to witness the unraveling of everything you thought was real, if you want to understand what happens when mythology becomes flesh and divinity steps through the mirror of reality, then subscribe now, because what comes next isn't a story about salvation. It's an account of transformation so complete that by the end you'll question whether humanity survived it at all. Hit that notification bell because this tale doesn't have chapters. It has casualties, and you need to see each one. The Emperor of Mankind had arrived on Earth, and the first thing he did, the very first act of this ancient god walking among modern humans, was turn his gaze toward Washington, D.C. The entire eastern seaboard felt that gaze-like pressure, like gravity, had tripled in an instant. Then, with a gesture so casual it seemed almost gentle, he raised one golden gauntlet hand, and the Pentagon began to burn, not with fire, with purity. A white-hot radiance that didn't destroy the building but unmade it, erasing it from existence, atom by atom, along with every weapon, every war plan, every instrument of human violence contained within. 3,000 people inside didn't die. They simply stopped being. No screams, no pain. Just transition from existence to absence in the span of a heartbeat. The message was clear, even if no one wanted to understand it. The age of human warfare had ended. The age of his purpose had begun. Ilara watched the Pentagon's erasure through 17 different satellite feeds simultaneously, each one showing the same impossible truth from different angles. Her scientific mind tried to categorize it, to find natural explanations, but physics had stopped applying the moment that golden figure appeared. She'd spent her entire career studying the cosmos, measuring the age of stars, calculating the expansion of space itself. Ilaravit had prepared her for witnessing the arrival of something that predated cosmology, something that existed before the first light of creation. Her hands moved automatically, recording every data point, every measurement, even though the numbers made no sense. Temperature readings that showed negative Kelvin, gravitational signatures that suggested the entity weighed both nothing and everything. Energy outputs that should have vaporized the entire planet but instead felt warm, almost comforting, like standing near a fireplace in winter.
Around the world, 7 billion people stopped what they were doing. Traffic halted mid-flow as drivers stepped out of their vehicles staring skyward. Stock markets crashed not from panic but from abandonment, traders simply walking away from their screens as if money had become a child's toy they'd outgrown in an instant. In hospitals, patients disconnected their own IVs and walked toward windows, pressing their faces against glass, weeping with an emotion that had no name in any language. It wasn't joy. It wasn't terror. It was recognition without memory, the soul remembering what the mind had never known. Psychologists would later document this as the collective nostalgia event, humanity simultaneously homesick for a place they'd never been. But Alara knew better. This wasn't nostalgia, this was genetic memory, DNA remembering its creator. The religious implications hit within the first hour. In St. Peter's Basilica, Cardinal Marchetti stood before 50,000 people crammed into the square, his voice broadcast globally as he attempted to make sense of the theological earthquake. Is this the second coming? Is this Christ returned? His voice cracked with desperate hope. But in mosques across Mecca, imams fell silent, unable to reconcile their theology with the golden figure that emanated power beyond any prophet. In Buddhist temples, monks emerged from meditation with blood streaming from their noses, gasping that they touched something vast, something that existed outside the cycle of rebirth. Hindu priests in Varanasi declared him Kalki, the final avatar. Norse revivalists whispered about Odin. Every faith saw their culmination in that impossible figure. Every faith was right. Every faith was wrong. Scientists fared no better. CERN called an emergency conference that dissolved into chaos within minutes. Theoretical physicists presented equations suggesting the entity existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. Quantum biologists detected his presence in the entanglement of every particle on Earth, and cosmologists showed data proving he was outputting more energy than the entire observable universe had contained since the Big Bang. None of it made sense. All of it was measurable. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo University proposed a hypothesis that would later prove horrifyingly accurate. What if we're seeing something that exists outside our reality looking in? What if his arrival has punctured the membrane between universes? The question hung in the air like a prophecy nobody wanted fulfilled.
Then came the awakenings, scattered across every continent. People began demonstrating abilities that violated every known law of physics. In Mumbai, a homeless man lifted a bus with his mind to save trapped children, then collapsed screaming about voices made of fire. In São Paulo, a teacher's touch healed a student's cancer, and her hands glowed with the same golden light that filled the sky. In Moscow, a programmer spoke a word and every screen within a kilometer displayed his thoughts as living images. These weren't miracles in the religious sense. They were mutations, evolutions, humanity's latent psychic potential forcibly awakened by proximity to something so powerful it was rewriting the rules of what consciousness could do. Alara documented 47 cases in the first hour. By hour 6 the number exceeded 10,000, and most of them were dying. The psychic awakening wasn't gentle. For every person who gained abilities, 3 more lost their minds entirely, their brains unable to process the sudden expansion of perception. Emergency rooms overflowed with people screaming about seeing too much, hearing thoughts like thunder, feeling emotions from strangers as physical pain. Psychiatrists called it acute psychic exposure syndrome. The military called it Phase 1 of an invasion. Elara called it exactly what it was. The Emperor's presence was elevating humanity, whether humanity was ready or not. His very existence near Earth was acting like radiation, mutating human consciousness at the fundamental level. Some adapted, some transcended, most simply broke. Governments attempted response protocols designed for alien contact, but those plans assumed aliens would communicate through technology or mathematics. The Emperor communicated through presence, through being. His location over New York Harbor meant the entire eastern seaboard existed in what scientists termed the radiance field, a sphere of influence where his psychic pressure was most intense. Inside that field, people reported feeling simultaneously exposed and protected, as if standing naked before a judge who could see every thought, every sin, every secret shame, yet also feeling wrapped in purpose so vast that personal failures seemed insignificant. It was the feeling of being an ant discovering it was part of something bigger. The relief of individuality ending. The horror of self-dissolving. Elara made her first mistake then, the one that would define everything that followed. She spoke aloud, to her empty observatory, to the universe, to the golden figure she could see through her equipment standing motionless above the harbor. "What do you want from us?" she whispered, and he answered. Not with words, with vision. Her consciousness was suddenly somewhere else, seeing Earth from orbit, watching as lines of golden light spread across the planet's surface like veins connecting cities, nations, continents. She saw humanity not as individuals but as cells in a single organism. She saw the species from his perspective, billions of fragments that could become one perfect whole. The vision lasted 3 seconds. When she returned to herself, she was on the floor, nose bleeding, tears streaming, understanding in her bones what he wanted. Unity, not the metaphorical kind.
Not cooperation or peace.
Actual unity. One consciousness. One will, one purpose. Humanity wasn't going to be saved, it was going to be completed, and that completion required the death of everything that made a person separate from the whole. He moved at dawn on the second day. The Emperor stepped from above New York Harbor onto solid ground, and the Earth itself shuddered in recognition. Seismographs across 3 continents registered the impact, not as vibration but as a pulse, rhythmic and deliberate, like the planet had suddenly grown a heartbeat. Each footstep resonated through geological layer, through the mantle, through the core, as if he was reminding the world who had shaped it in ages past. Witnesses described his movement as both glacially slow and impossibly fast, walking at normal pace yet covering miles with each stride, distance bending around him like space itself was eager to bring him where he needed to go. He walked west, toward the heartland, toward the center of America, and nobody could explain why that direction mattered until the prophets started screaming. The prophets weren't holy men, they were ordinary people whose minds had cracked open under the psychic pressure. Their consciousness expanded beyond the ability to process individual thought. In Seattle, a barista named Marcus Chen stood on a coffee shop table and spoke in a voice that carried for blocks without amplification, his words appearing simultaneously as text on every phone in the city. He walks the ley lines of faith. He follows the rivers of human belief carved into the earth by 10,000 years of prayer. In Cairo, an engineer named Fatima al-Rashid stopped traffic by standing in the street,
her eyes bleeding golden light as she drew a map in the air with burning fingers, showing the path he would take across continents. The maps matched perfectly. He was walking the invisible roads that connected every place humans had ever worshipped, every sacred site, every location where faith had soaked into the soil like blood. He was claiming them, rewriting them, making them his. Elara tracked his progress from Mauna Kea, watching through satellites as the golden figure crossed through New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio. Everywhere he passed, reality changed, not violently, almost gently. Trees grew straighter, their bark developing subtle geometric patterns like circuit boards. Rivers ran clearer, their water taking on a faint luminescence. The air itself seemed to crystallize, becoming sharp and pure in a way that made breathing feel like drinking light. Animals behaved strangely, predators and prey standing side by side, all facing the same direction, all watching him pass with eyes that reflected golden fire. It was beautiful. It was wrong. Nature was bending to his will without any visible force being applied, as if the natural world recognized him as its rightful architect and was correcting itself to match his design. People couldn't resist the pull. By the third day, his path was lined with millions walking alongside him, keeping pace somehow despite his impossible stride. They came from cities, from farms, from suburbs, abandoning jobs and families and lives to join what became known as the Golden March. News helicopters captured footage of the procession from above, showing a river of humanity flowing west, all walking in perfect synchronization without any coordination, their footsteps falling in rhythm with his. Elara watched interviews with people who'd joined the march. They all said the same thing, variations on a single theme. I had to go, not wanted to, had to. Like my legs knew the way before my mind decided. One woman, a doctor from Pittsburgh, stood before cameras with tears streaming and said something that haunted every broadcast. I left my daughter in her hospital bed. She's dying. And I walked away. I couldn't stop myself. What is he doing to us? The answer came from the awakened psychers, the ones whose minds had survived the initial expansion. They could feel what ordinary humans couldn't, could perceive the invisible architecture he was building. Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the few psychically awakened scientists still capable of coherent speech, explained it in an emergency UN broadcast that Elara watched with growing dread. He's not controlling people. He's resonating with something already inside them. Every human has a genetic memory of him, a pattern written in our DNA that recognizes his authority at the cellular level. We're not being forced to follow. We're remembering that we're supposed to follow. Our bodies remember him as creator, as father, as the one who designed our species. Free will isn't being overridden. It's being reminded that it was always conditional. The broadcast ended with Dr. Chen collapsing mid-sentence, her nose fountaining blood as her expanded consciousness encountered something too vast to contain. Weather patterns began shifting on the fourth day. Meteorologists watched in confusion as storm systems that should have been chaotic started moving in geometric formations, arranging themselves in spirals and fractals around his position. Rain fell in patterns that looked almost deliberate, watering crops with perfect precision, avoiding cities but flooding abandoned industrial sites as if nature itself was being directed to cleanse human pollution. Temperatures normalized globally, the scorching heat of climate change simply stopping. atmospheric carbon levels dropping as plants across the world suddenly began photosynthesizing at triple their normal rate. Environmental scientists celebrated for approximately 6 hours before realizing the horror underneath the miracle. He was optimizing Earth, making it efficient, turning a chaotic living system into a garden designed for a single purpose, supporting maximum human population under unified control. The planet wasn't being saved. It was being terraformed into a factory for producing worshippers. Then came the night. He stopped in Kansas, standing in a wheat field that stretched to every horizon. The Golden March had swollen to 20 million people by then, a carpet of humanity surrounding him in concentric circles that extended for miles. Elara had driven from Hawaii, compelled by scientific curiosity that felt increasingly like divine summons, setting up equipment on a hill 3 miles from his position. Through thermal imaging, she watched as the temperature around him began to rise, not from heat but from something else, a warmth that registered on equipment but felt cold to human skin. The sky above him opened, not splitting like before but peeling back like a curtain, revealing something behind the stars. A light that wasn't light, a darkness that wasn't dark, a realm where physics screamed and died, where mathematics became prayer, where the laws of nature were suggestions he'd written and could rewrite at will. Scientists would later identify it as a wound in space-time, a tear in the membrane between dimensions. Mystics called it the warp. They were describing the same thing. Elara felt it then, standing on her hill with equipment sparking and failing around her. Felt the pressure of something immense trying to push through that wound into reality. She saw shapes in the tear, forms that hurt to perceive, entities made of concepts rather than matter, feeding on human emotion like sharks drawn to blood in water. The Emperor stood beneath that wound like
Atlas holding back the sky, his presence the only thing preventing those entities from flooding through into Earth. She understood with sickening clarity. He hadn't come to conquer humanity. He'd come to protect it. But his protection required humanity's absolute submission, required every human mind to be locked into his psychic network where emotions could be controlled, where faith could be weaponized, where free thought could be eliminated, where free thought could be eliminated. Might Caesar might subliminus might subliminus bodinus aminus might subliminus might subliminus might subliminus aminus might subliminus 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 might subliminus. Because free thought, individual emotion, personal desire, these were the things that fed the entities in the warp. To save humanity from those monsters, he had to kill what made humans human. The choice was eternal slavery or extinction, and he'd made that choice for everyone without asking permission. The purges began on the 7th day, not with proclamation or warning, but with fire that burned wrong. In Las Vegas, the entire strip ignited simultaneously, every casino, every hotel, every monument to excess consumed by flames that were gold instead of orange, cold instead of hot. 50,000 people inside didn't burn, they vanished, erased from existence as thoroughly as the Pentagon had been, leaving behind buildings that collapsed into ash so fine it looked like snow. Survivors spoke of feeling a judgment pass over them, a presence that looked inside their souls and weighed what it found there. Those who'd built fortunes on addiction, on exploitation, on making profit from human weakness, they were the ones who disappeared. The dealers, the cleaners, the waitresses who'd simply needed jobs. They walked out of the golden fire, untouched but changed, their eyes reflecting light that hadn't been there before. Elara documented the pattern as it spread globally. In Dubai, towers built by slave labor crumbled to dust in minutes, the corrupt developers inside them simply ceasing to exist, while the enslaved workers found themselves suddenly free, standing in rubble that sparkled like crushed diamonds. In Geneva, 3 banks imploded simultaneously, taking with them everyone who'd profited from blood money, from dictator fortunes, from the financial architecture of human suffering. The money itself remained, but transformed, physical currency turning to gold leaf that scattered in the wind like prey. Digital accounts zeroed out or redistributed according to rules nobody understood but everyone felt were somehow correct. It wasn't justice in any legal sense, it was correction, reality being edited to remove errors. And those errors were people whose existence had been built on causing harm. The religious institutions burned brightest of all. In Rome, St. Peter's Basilica stood untouched while the Vatican's administrative buildings behind it combusted with that same cold golden fire. Centuries of accumulated wealth, vaporizing as cardinals and bishops who'd covered up abuse, who'd hoarded resources meant for the poor, who'd wielded faith as a weapon for power, all of them disappeared in flames that smelled like incense and tasted like copper. The Pope survived, standing in the square as his entire bureaucracy vanished, and witnesses said he wept not from grief but relief, as if a burden he'd carried for decades had finally been lifted. Similar scenes played out at megachurches across America, in mosques controlled by extremists, in temples where holy men had grown fat on donations meant for the hungry. The institutions of faith weren't being destroyed, they were being sterilized. But the emperor's definition of corruption wasn't limited to the obviously evil. In Seattle, an art gallery burned, taking with it 7 artists and their entire body of work. Their crime, investigators later discovered, was creating art that celebrated meaninglessness, that promoted the idea that existence had no purpose, that beauty could be found in entropy and decay. Their philosophy had been harmless, even fashionable in academic circles, but under his judgment, nihilism itself was corruption because it fed the entities beyond reality, gave them foothold in human consciousness. In Tokyo, an entire tech company vanished. 300 programmers erased because their AI research had been heading toward creating truly independent artificial consciousness. He saw this as humanity attempting to birth new forms of corruption, new souls that could be twisted by the warp. The purge wasn't just punishing evil, it was eliminating any thought pattern that deviated from his design for what humanity should be. Philosophers and ethicists went mad trying to understand the logic. Dr. James Morrison, an ethics professor at Oxford, spent 48 hours analyzing every documented purge before broadcasting his conclusions in a lecture that was interrupted by his own immolation.
He's not operating on morality as we understand it, Morrison explained, his voice steady even as his hands began to glow with that terrible golden light. He's operating on utility. Every purge removes someone or something that would make humanity harder to unify. The corrupt are purged because corruption creates division. The nihilists are purged because meaninglessness prevents unified purpose. The abusers are purged because trauma fragments the soul. He's not a judge, he's a surgeon, and he's removing everything that would prevent humanity from becoming a single functional organism. Morrison's final words before he vanished into light were almost laughing. We wanted God to come down and fix things. We never specified what fixing would look like. Ilara watched her colleagues disappear. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who'd theorized about dimensional breaches, burned during a video call, his last expression one of understanding rather than fear. Dr. Sarah Chen, the psychic scientist, lasted 3 days after her UN broadcast before golden fire consumed her mid-sentence during a follow-up interview. Ilara survived, though she didn't understand why, until she received a message through her equipment, words appearing on dead screens in golden text. You will witness, you will record, you will understand. She was being kept alive not from mercy but from purpose. He needed her to document the transformation, to serve as historian for the death of old humanity and birth of the new. The weight of that purpose felt like chains made of light, beautiful and terrible, impossible to remove. The world's population dropped by 2 billion in 10 days. Not from violence in the traditional sense, but from the surgical removal of everything he deemed incompatible with his vision. Streets emptied not from fear but from absence, entire neighborhoods turning into ghost towns where buildings stood intact but people had simply stopped existing. Governments couldn't respond because most government officials had been among the first to burn. Their entire careers built on compromise and corruption now judged as incompatible with purity. What remained was a power vacuum, and into that vacuum walked the awakened psychers, the ones whose minds had survived expansion, and now served as his proxies, speaking with his authority, organizing the survivors into new structures that looked nothing like the old world. Cities began to reorganize themselves according to patterns that made no logical sense but felt right to people living in them. Buildings were abandoned or repurposed based on criteria nobody could articulate but everyone understood. In what had been New York, people spontaneously began constructing new architecture without blueprints or coordination, raising structures that looked like cathedrals designed by mathematicians, all angles and golden ratios, spaces optimized not for human comfort but for psychic resonance. The awakened explained it in terms Ilara barely comprehended. We're building temples of thought, places where human consciousness can synchronize, where the barriers between individual minds can be lowered safely, prepared for the moment when he decides those barriers should fall completely. They spoke of this coming unity with joy. Ilara recorded their testimonies with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, understanding she was documenting a species learning to celebrate its own extinction. On the 15th day, he stopped moving. The Emperor stood in the exact geographic center of the continental United States, in a field that had once grown corn but now grew nothing, the soil sterilized to bare rock by his presence. Around him, the Golden March had swollen to 300 million people, a sea of humanity covering hundreds of square miles, all standing in perfect silence, all facing him like flowers tracking the sun. Ilara had positioned herself on a ridge 7 miles away, far enough to maintain some autonomy, close enough to witness what came next. She'd stopped sleeping 3 days ago, her body sustained by something that wasn't food or water but pure purpose radiating from his direction. Her equipment had evolved beyond recognition. Instruments that had measured electromagnetic radiation now detecting frequencies that shouldn't exist, wavelengths of thought itself made manifest. He raised both arms at dawn, and the sky shattered, not metaphorically. The actual sky cracked like glass fragments of blue falling away to reveal the screaming void behind reality. Through those cracks, Ilara could see them clearly now, the entities that lived in the warp, drawn to Earth by the psychic beacon of 7 billion human souls suddenly awakened to their own potential, things made of hunger and rage and despair, feeding on human emotion, the way whales feed on plankton, vast and mindless and infinitely cruel. She saw a shape that was all teeth and desire, bloated on human greed across millennia. She saw something that looked like a beautiful corpse, dripping with diseases that were also philosophy, corruption that spread through ideas rather than blood. She saw laughter that had weight and mass jokes told by something that found suffering hilarious. These were gods, she realized, not the gods humanity had imagined, but the gods humanity had created through 10,000 years of violence and excess and uncontrolled emotion. The Emperor stood beneath the broken sky as an anchor point, his presence the only thing preventing those entities from pouring through the cracks into physical reality. Golden light erupted from his position in a column that pierced the heavens, a psychic lighthouse so intense that astronauts on the International Space Station reported seeing it with naked eyes from orbit, a pillar of radiance extending past the moon, past Mars, visible across half the solar system. This was the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that in his original universe guided humanity.
Across the galaxy. Here on Earth it served a different purpose. It was a seal, a plug driven into the wound between dimensions, holding back the flood of horrors that had followed him through the gap it torn in reality when he arrived. Every human on Earth felt it ignite, felt their consciousness suddenly pulled toward that central point, their minds becoming fuel for the lighthouse that protected them from annihilation. The cost was immediate and terrible. People closest to him, the ones within a mile of his position, simply stopped being individuals. Their bodies remained intact, but their consciousness merged. 300 souls becoming one compound mind that spoke with a single voice through multiple mouths. They walked in perfect synchronization, breathed in unison, their hearts beating to the same rhythm. When one felt pain, all felt it. When one thought a thought, all shared it instantly. They were the first, the prototype, demonstration of what he intended for all humanity. Ilara watched through telescopic equipment as they moved like a school of fish, each body perfectly coordinated with every other, no hesitation, no confusion, just perfect unity of purpose. It was beautiful in the way a machine is beautiful, all waste eliminated, all inefficiency removed. It was horrifying in the way death is horrifying, seeing something human become something else entirely. The transformation spread in waves, concentric circles radiating outward from his position like ripples in a pond. People within 5 miles lost individual agency by the second hour, their minds networked together in groups of thousands, still maintaining some sense of self, but that self now shared among many bodies. Within 10 miles, people reported feeling thoughts that weren't their own, emotions bleeding across the boundaries of identity, the walls of skull and skin becoming permeable to consciousness. Within 50 miles, languages started to fail, people finding they could communicate directly mind to mind with more clarity than words had ever provided. Alara stood at exactly 7 miles and felt the edge of it brushing against her thoughts like fingers made of light, reaching for her mind, promising an end to loneliness, to uncertainty, to the terrible burden of being a separate self. She ran, not from fear, though fear was certainly part of it, but from the journalist's instinct to maintain enough distance to report the truth. She drove east through landscapes that looked wrong, where forests had spontaneously arranged themselves in geometric patterns and rivers flowed in straight lines as if nature itself was being absorbed into his grand design. Other refugees fled alongside her, people who'd somehow maintained resistance to the psychic pull, though their numbers decreased with every passing hour. Some simply stopped their vehicles mid-highway and turned around, driving back toward the Astronomicon, with expressions of religious ecstasy. Others pulled over and walked into the woods, seeking isolation that would protect them, only to be found days later wandering in circles, their minds already half integrated into the network despite physical distance. The awakened psychers served as his priests now, traveling outward from the Astronomicon to guide the transformation in distant populations. They spoke with his authority, their words carrying weight that bent reality around them, making impossible suggestions feel reasonable. Alara watched a broadcast from London where a psyker named Marcus, once an accountant from Manchester, now stood before Parliament and explained the new order. Individuality is a disease we evolved by accident, he said, his voice resonating with harmonics that made electronics vibrate in sympathy. We were meant to be one organism from the beginning. Every religion sensed this truth, called it different names: unity with God, nirvana, ego death, the dissolution of self into divine love. We mistook poetry for metaphor when it was always instruction. He has returned to complete what was interrupted millennia ago when we fell into separation. Marcus's words carried such conviction that 3/4 of Parliament simply nodded and accepted, walking out of the building to join the growing processions of people migrating toward the American heartland. Alara reached the Atlantic coast on the 20th day, setting up new equipment in an abandoned lighthouse in Maine, as far from the Astronomicon as she could get while remaining on the continent. From this distance she could still think clearly, could still maintain the boundaries of her own mind, though even here she felt the pull like gravity, like being a moon trying not to fall into orbit around a planet. She established communication with other holdouts, pockets of resistance scattered globally, scientists in Antarctica, monks in Tibet, indigenous communities in the Amazon, who'd somehow maintained autonomy through ancient practices that recognized and resisted psychic intrusion. They compared notes, trying to understand the mechanism,
searching for some way to preserve individual consciousness against the tide of forced unity. But every day their numbers decreased. Every day more voices fell silent, absorbed into the growing network of minds that pulsed with his will. Alara lasted 28 days before he called her, not with words, not with force, with attention. She was analyzing data in the lighthouse when she felt his gaze turn in her direction, felt the weight of cosmic awareness focusing on her specific location across 3,000 miles of distance. The sensation was indescribable, like being suddenly aware that a mountain was looking at you, that an ocean had noticed your existence. Every cell in her body remembered him simultaneously, DNA recognizing the signature of its architect, and she understood with absolute certainty that he had always known exactly where she was, had allowed her distance, had permitted her isolation for reasons that served his purpose. The telescope through which she'd been observing the Astronomicon suddenly reversed its function, and through it she saw him, not as an image but as presence, his golden eyes meeting hers across impossible distance. The lighthouse filled with light that had texture, that had flavor, that could be felt pressing against skin like warm oil. Alara's equipment exploded in showers of sparks as power surged through circuits that couldn't contain his attention. She stood paralyzed, not from fear but from sensory overload, as his consciousness touched the edge of hers like a surgeon's finger testing the boundary of an organ before cutting. In that moment of contact she experienced his perspective, saw herself as he saw her, a cluster of neurons firing in patterns, a collection of memories and traumas and hopes all reducing down to pure information, readable, analyzable, ultimately irrelevant except as a single data point in a species-wide equation. She was important only in that she represented a problem to be solved, a last fragment of resistance that needed understanding before it could be absorbed. Then he showed her everything, not through vision but through experience. Her consciousness forcibly expanded to perceive what he perceived. She saw Earth from orbit, saw the golden light spreading across continents like mycorrhizal networks, connecting minds the way fungus connects trees in a forest floor. She saw the warp, that screaming dimension of pure emotion, pressing against reality with hunger that had no bottom, entities within it that would feast on humanity's souls forever if given the chance. She saw alternate timelines, possibilities branching in every direction, futures where the warp broke through and humanity became food for demons, futures where humans tried to fight and were scattered across millennia of suffering, futures where resistance fractured into endless holy wars, in every timeline where humanity remained separate, where individuals maintained autonomy. The species ended in horror. Only in unity was their survival. Only in submission was their salvation. The vision shifted, showing her the Imperium he'd built in another universe, a galaxy-spanning empire of trillions, where humanity had survived for 10,000 years through absolute control, through eliminating every deviation, through transforming the species into a machine of faith and violence that could hold back cosmic darkness. She saw worlds burned for heresy, saw billions sacrificed daily to power the Astronomicon, saw entire generations born, indoctrinated, and killed without ever experiencing a single moment of individual thought. She saw the suffering, the cruelty, the endless grinding horror of existence under his rule, and beneath it all, She saw the mathematics that proved it worked, that showed this nightmare empire surviving when every gentler alternative had failed. He wasn't cruel, he was practical. Humanity's survival required humanity's death, the species or the individual, never both. When the vision released her, Alara collapsed to the lighthouse floor, blood streaming from her nose and ears, her body convulsing as her nervous system tried to process stimulus it wasn't designed to handle. She lay there for hours, or maybe minutes, time having lost meaning, after touching consciousness that existed outside duration. When she finally regained enough control to move, she found herself changed, not integrated into the network, not yet, but marked by the contact, her thoughts now visible to him whenever he chose to look, her resistance meaningless, because he could simply wait for it to erode. She was a terminal patient who just received her prognosis. The question wasn't if she'd be absorbed, only when, and whether she'd go willingly, or screaming. She tried to run again, stumbling out of the lighthouse into morning that looked too bright, colors too saturated, as if his attention had increased the resolution of reality around her. But where could she run? The unified were everywhere now. 4 billion minds networked together, spreading across every continent. They weren't hunting her. They didn't need to. They simply existed. A presence so vast that being near them meant being absorbed by them, like trying to remain dry while swimming in an ocean. She made it 3 miles down the coast before collapsing on a rocky beach, staring at waves that moved with disturbing synchronization. The entire Atlantic Ocean seemingly coordinating its tides to match the rhythm of the Astronomican's pulse. A child found her there at sunset, a girl maybe 7 years old, walking alone on the beach with eyes that reflected golden light, her consciousness already integrated despite her age. The child
sat beside Alara without speaking, just being present, and through that presence, Alara felt the network touching her thoughts gently, exploratory, curious about the texture of her resistance. "It doesn't hurt," the child said finally, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested thousands speaking through one small throat. "We thought it would hurt before. We were afraid of losing ourselves. But we didn't lose anything. We just became more. You'll understand when you stop fighting." The child's words carried such gentle certainty, such absolute conviction, that Alara found herself considering it, imagining what it would feel like to simply let go, to stop being alone, to merge into that vast warm consciousness where suffering was shared and therefore meaningless. She sent the child away, managed to maintain enough autonomy to refuse the comfort being offered, and spent the night recording her final logs. She described the visions he'd shown her, documented the mathematical certainty that resistance meant extinction, explained in careful scientific language why his solution was the only viable option for species survival, even as every word felt like treason against her own humanity. She broadcast these logs to the few remaining holdouts, not as encouragement but as warning. "He's not evil. That's what makes this so terrible. He's right. The universe he showed me is one where cruelty is efficiency, where compassion is weakness, where love itself becomes a tactical calculation in the game of species survival. And the math works. That's the horror we can't escape. He's proven that kindness loses, that mercy fails, that the only way to survive a hostile universe is to become something monstrous enough to match it. The last words she recorded that night, before her equipment finally died completely, would be quoted in what remained of human literature, for the brief period before literature itself became obsolete. If you're listening to this, you're already too late. Not because he's won, but because he was never fighting. This isn't conquest, it's inevitability. He didn't come to destroy our world. He came to show us the world we've been living in all along. The real universe hiding behind the comfortable lies we told ourselves about meaning and purpose and individual worth. And once you see that truth, once you understand that chaos waits at every border of consciousness, ready to devour anything soft enough to feel love or fear or hope, there's only one logical response. You kneel, not from worship, from pragmatism. You surrender not your body but your soul, because keeping your soul means losing everything else. The recording ended with the sound of waves, perfectly synchronized, counting down to the moment when even Alara's resistance would end. The holdouts in Antarctica lasted 33 days. Alara monitored their final transmissions from her lighthouse, listening as scientists who'd fled to the most isolated place on Earth discovered that isolation meant nothing against psychic reach. Their last message came from Dr. Henrik Volkov, a physicist who'd spent 2 decades studying cosmic radiation in the frozen South. His voice cracked as he described what was happening to his team, how they'd started finishing each other's sentences, then thinking each other's thoughts, then forgetting which body belonged to which mind. "We're still physically separate," he reported, words slurring as if drunk on unity. "But we can't remember why that matters anymore. The boundaries feel arbitrary, painful, even like wearing clothes that are too tight. He's not forcing us together. We're just realizing we were always meant to be one thing that got broken into pieces." The transmission ended with laughter, multiple voices overlapping in perfect harmony, before dissolving into static that sounded almost musical. Tibet fell on day 36. The monasteries that had stood for centuries, homes to monks who'd spent lifetimes mastering control of their own consciousness, couldn't resist a presence that operated on fundamental layers deeper than meditation could reach. The Dalai Lama's final statement, broadcast from Lhasa before the network consumed him, carried bitter understanding. "We sought enlightenment through the dissolution of ego. We practiced for decades to achieve what he forces upon us in moments. But enlightenment was supposed to be a choice, a path walked willingly through suffering toward liberation. This is not liberation, this is being swallowed. The destination looks the same from a distance, but the journey was everything. Without the journey, without the choice, this is not awakening, it is merely ending." His words carried such profound sadness that listeners across the world wept, understanding they were hearing the death of 10,000 years of spiritual seeking. The Amazon tribes lasted longest, protected by something in their ancestral practices that Alara couldn't quantify scientifically. Shamans who'd maintained connection to pre-modern consciousness, whose minds operated on frequencies the modern world had forgotten, found ways to slip between the network's attention like fish evading nets. But protection only delayed the inevitable. Alara received their final message through channels that predated digital communication, transmitted through methods that looked like ritual but functioned as technology. Images burned into her mind during a dream that wasn't quite dream. She saw the chief of the Yanomami standing in rainforest that glowed with bioluminescence,
speaking to her across distance through pure will. The forest taught us that all living things are connected. We thought we understood unity, but his unity is not the web of life, it is the web consuming the spider. We are being digested. The vision ended with the forest itself changing, trees rearranging into geometric perfection, organic chaos becoming crystalline order. By day 40, only scattered individuals remained autonomous, and Alara understood she was among them not from strength but from his permission. He was using her as a case study, observing how long a human mind could maintain resistance when shown absolute proof of resistance's futility. She'd become an experiment, a data point in his analysis of human psychology, allowed to watch the world transform so he could measure her breaking point. The knowledge should have been humiliating. Instead, it was almost comforting. At least her suffering had purpose. At least her individual agony meant something in the grand equation, even if what it meant was merely this is how long it takes to break someone who's seen too much. The Unified began construction projects that transformed continents. Alara watched through satellite feeds that still functioned, transmitted through networks that now served his purposes rather than human commerce. In North America, cities were being deconstructed and rebuilt as enormous mandalas visible from orbit. Millions of people working in perfect coordination without blueprints or plans, each individual knowing their exact role in a design too vast for any single mind to comprehend. In Asia, forests were planted in patterns that looked random to human eyes but formed circuits when viewed from above. Organic computer processors growing from soil, designed to amplify psychic resonance. In Europe, the coastlines themselves were being reshaped, ocean and land redistributing according to golden ratios that optimized the flow of consciousness across geographical boundaries. The Unified didn't suffer. That was the detail that haunted Alara most. She'd expected to see slaves, to witness masses of people forced into labor against their will. Instead, she saw joy, genuine, uncomplicated joy that came from purpose so clear it eliminated all doubt. Workers building impossible structures did so with expressions of religious ecstasy. Their pain filtered through the network and distributed across billions of minds until individual suffering became negligible background noise. A man whose hands bled from hauling stone wore the same serene smile as the child who'd found Alara on the beach, because his pain was everyone's pain, diluted to homeopathic levels, while his sense of purpose was amplified by contributing to a vision shared by 4 billion souls. They were happy. That was the horror. Slavery without suffering, imprisonment without awareness of chains. Alara tried one final experiment, broadcasting a message directly toward the Astronomicon, using every remaining watt of power in the lighthouse's generator. She spoke not to the unified masses but to him directly, challenging the logic he'd shown her, presenting the one argument she hoped might penetrate divine certainty. If survival requires becoming monsters, then what are we surviving for? If the price of existence is everything that makes existence worth having, then haven't we already lost? You showed me that kindness fails in this universe, but failure with honor is still honor. Existence without meaning is just prolonged dying. We're becoming immortal corpses preserved through cruelty, surviving but not alive. Is that really victory? Her words echoed across the psychic spectrum, transmitted on frequencies that made electronics scream. For 3 heartbeats, she thought she might have reached something, might have planted doubt in a consciousness that had never known uncertainty. His response came instantly, not as words but as sensation. as understanding forced into her neurons like a hot wire. She felt his perspective on time, his view of millennia as moments, his experience of watching species rise and fall across galactic distances. From his vantage, kindness was a luxury afforded only to those who lived briefly enough to never see its consequences. Mercy accumulated as weakness across generations. Love became the lever that hostile forces used to destroy civilizations. He'd tried her way once, had built an empire on hope and progress and human potential, and watched it burn when that potential expressed itself as chaos. Now he built empires that couldn't burn because nothing soft enough to ignite remained. Survival first, always survival. Meaning could be reconstructed later, artificially, pumped back into the species once safety was assured. But first came the preservation of the organism, even if that meant killing the soul to save the body. On day 45, Elara stopped eating, not from despair, though despair was certainly present, but because her body no longer required food. The network's influence had reached even her
Isolated lighthouse, her cells learning to sustain themselves on psychic energy, bleeding from the astronomican thousands of miles away. She stood before a mirror and saw changes that should have been impossible, her eyes reflecting faint golden light, her skin taking on a luminescence that made her look carved from alabaster, her movements becoming more fluid as if gravity was negotiable rather than absolute. She was being transformed against her will, upgraded without consent, her biology rewritten to match his design for what humanity should be. The worst part was feeling grateful. Her body celebrated each change, DNA singing with joy at becoming what it had always been coded to become, even as her mind screamed at the violation. The world's population stabilized at 5 billion. 2 billion had been purged in the early days, their corruption eliminated like tumors excised from a body. Another 2 billion had died in the transition, their minds too rigid to accept unity, their consciousness shattering like glass under pressure they couldn't withstand. The remaining 5 billion existed as one organism with 5 billion sensory organs, each body a cell in a collective that thought with perfect coordination. They called themselves the unified humanity, though Elara couldn't help thinking of them as something else, the first generation of a new species, as different from baseline humans as humans were from chimpanzees. Evolution forced at psychic gunpoint, speciation achieved in weeks rather than millennia. She maintained contact with one other holdout, a woman named Dr. Amara Okonkwo, who barricaded herself in a bunker beneath what had been Lagos. Amara's voice came through encrypted channels that kept degrading, the network slowly learning to infiltrate even their hidden frequencies. They spoke like survivors of an apocalypse, sharing observations about the world ending around them, finding comfort in another voice that still belonged to a single mind. I've been analyzing the pattern, Amara reported during their last coherent conversation. He's not just unifying minds, he's optimizing them. The unified are smarter than we were, process information faster, solve problems that would have taken us years in seconds. He's not destroying humanity's potential, he's actualizing it. We're becoming what we could have been if evolution had continued for another million years. The tragedy isn't that we're dying, it's that we're being perfected against our will. Elara watched the cities through her telescope,
saw structures rising that made ancient wonders look primitive, pyramids that floated without visible support, their architecture somehow negotiating with gravity itself, towers that grew rather than being built, psychic will made manifest as crystalline spires that reached toward the astronomican like plants seeking sunlight, gardens where flowers bloomed in colors that didn't exist in nature's palette, hues visible only to minds expanded beyond baseline human perception. The unified were reshaping Earth into something beautiful and terrible, a paradise designed for a species that no longer existed, maintained by creatures that had once been human, but now were something magnificently alien. The entities in the warp grew restless. Alara could see them clearly now, her expanding perception making her aware of the membrane between dimensions. They pressed against reality like faces pushing against rubber, desperate to break through, drawn by the psychic beacon of 5 billion networked souls. But the astronomican held them back, his presence a wall that couldn't be breached. She understood the deal now, the transaction that justified his tyranny. He was the only thing standing between humanity and damnation. Remove him, restore individual freedom, and within hours the warp would flood through, entities of pure chaos devouring souls until nothing remained but screaming. The choice had never been freedom versus slavery. It had been his slavery or their feast. When framed that way, when the alternatives were clear, resistance became not noble but suicidal. On day 50, Amara's transmission stopped. Alara called out across every frequency, begging for response, knowing already what the silence meant. Hours later, a new voice came through, familiar and foreign simultaneously. "This is Dr. Amara Okonkwo," or rather this was her name when she was singular. The voice carried harmonics that suggested thousands speaking in unison. "I have joined the unified, not from force but from understanding. I realized, as you will realize, that resistance is selfish. Every moment I remained separate, I caused suffering to the collective. My isolation was a wound in the network, a hole that allowed pain to leak through. Now I am whole, now I am home. The you that resists is not noble, it is damaged. Let us heal you, Alara. Let us show you what peace feels like." The transmission ended before Alara could respond, leaving her alone in a lighthouse that felt suddenly much too large for a single occupant. She considered suicide, loaded the handgun she'd kept hidden, pressed the barrel against her temple, felt the cold metal that promised an end to the crushing loneliness of being the last individual on a planet of 5 billion networked minds. But even that choice had been taken from her. When she pulled the trigger, nothing happened. The weapon had stopped functioning, not from any mechanical failure but because his will had touched it, had made violence against his property impossible. She was too valuable now, the last control subject, the final data point in his study of human resistance. He wouldn't let her die until he'd extracted every ounce of useful information from her breaking. She threw the useless weapon across the room and collapsed, laughing and weeping simultaneously, understanding she'd become the rarest thing in the universe, a museum piece, a specimen of extinct humanity preserved under glass for future study. That night, as she lay on the lighthouse floor staring at ceiling that seemed to pulse with faint golden light, Alara experienced something that felt like dreaming but operated on levels deeper than sleep. She found herself standing in a vast chamber that existed in no physical space, surrounded by presences she couldn't see but could feel like pressure against her consciousness. These were the collective, the 5 billion minds unified, and they were waiting for her with something that felt like love, not individual love, not the messy emotional attachment between separate beings, but the encompassing love of an organism welcoming back a lost cell. They showed her what she would become when resistance finally ended, no longer alone, no longer bearing the crushing weight of individual existence, no longer responsible for making meaning in a meaningless universe. Purpose would be provided, connection would be absolute, suffering would be distributed and therefore negligible. All she had to do was let go. All she had to surrender was the illusion that being separate made her special. She woke on day 53 with clarity that felt like madness. Alara understood with certainty that bypassed rational thought, that she had to see him, not through satellites or telescopes or second-hand observation, but face-to-face, one last act of individual will before that individuality dissolved. She packed nothing because nothing remained worth taking. The lighthouse that had been her sanctuary felt suddenly like a prison, isolation transforming from protection into punishment. She walked out into morning that tasted of copper and honey, her legs carrying her west before her mind consciously chose direction. The pull was undeniable now, the Astronomican's gravity claiming her like the moon finally surrendering to the planet's embrace. She was going home. That's what it felt like, impossibly, horrifyingly. Going home to a place she'd never been. The landscape had transformed beyond recognition. Forests she passed through had reorganized themselves into cathedrals of living wood, trees growing in spirals and arches that created natural temples where light fell in geometric patterns. Rivers flowed uphill when necessary, water obeying laws written by him rather than physics. She encountered the unified along roads that hadn't existed 3 days prior, pathways that seemed to grow from the earth itself, organic and perfect. They moved past her without acknowledgement. Thousands of bodies flowing like schools of fish, each individual perfectly coordinated with every other. They sang as they worked, millions of voices harmonizing in compositions that had no author because they arose spontaneously from the collective consciousness. The music was beautiful enough to make her weep. It was also the sound of humanity forgetting how to be alone. She walked for days or weeks, time losing meaning as her body sustained itself on purpose alone. Other pilgrims joined her on the westward roads, the last holdouts finally surrendering to the inevitable, drawn toward the Astronomican like moths to flame. They didn't speak to each other, these final individuals maintaining their isolation even in proximity, clinging to the last moments of being singular selves. Alara recognized faces from old broadcasts, the Brazilian resistance leader who'd sworn to die before submitting, the Japanese philosopher who'd written manifestos on the sanctity of individual consciousness, the Australian survivalist who'd stockpiled weapons against the Golden Tide, all of them walking west now with expressions that mixed resignation and relief, surrendering not from defeat but from exhaustion. They'd fought the good fight, they'd lost, now came the peace of acceptance. The Astronomican grew larger with each step, its golden light visible even through closed eyelids, burning through retinas like staring directly at the sun. Pain became constant companion, her nervous system overloading from proximity to psychic radiation that would have killed baseline humans instantly. But she wasn't baseline anymore, had been upgraded against her will into something that could survive in his presence. Each mile brought new changes. Her thoughts began moving faster, processing information at speeds that made her previous cognition seem sluggish. She started understanding languages she'd never learned, mathematics she'd never studied, concepts that had no words in human vocabulary simply appearing in her consciousness fully formed. The network was touching her mind more directly,
now preparing her, optimizing her for integration. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt anticipation. On what she calculated was day 62, she crested a ridge and saw Kansas had become Jerusalem. The geographic center of America had transformed into something that defied description. A city that looked like it had been grown rather than built. Structures of crystal and gold rising miles into the sky, connected by bridges that existed in more dimensions than she could perceive. At the center stood the Astronomicon itself, a pillar of light that extended from Earth to stratosphere, so bright it hurt to look at yet impossible to look away from. Around it, arranged in concentric circles like rings of a tree, stood 5 billion humans, not moving, not speaking, just standing, all facing the center, their combined consciousness radiating outward like heat from a star. They were praying without prayer, worshipping without religion, their existence itself serving as devotion. Ilara understood she was looking at the future of the species, functional, unified, and utterly alien. She descended into the city along paths that seemed to move beneath her feet, carrying her forward with gentle insistence. The unified took no notice of her passage, their attention focused entirely inward, on the network that connected them. She passed through crowds numbering millions, yet felt more alone than she had in the empty lighthouse, surrounded by bodies but unable to find a single mind separate enough to acknowledge hers. This was the loneliness that followed integration, she realized, not the absence of people, but the absence of other. The terrible isolation of being part of something so large that individual recognition became impossible, like being a blood cell trying to make conversation with the heart. At the inner ring, she found the other pilgrims, perhaps 10,000 of them, the last independent humans on Earth gathered in a zone where his presence pressed down like atmosphere on Venus. They stood in loose groups, not speaking but not yet unified, existing in the liminal space between what they had been and what they were about to become. Ilara recognized her own expression on their faces, resignation mixed with curiosity, fear blended with longing, the complicated emotional state of someone standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing they're about to jump, but uncertain whether they're falling or flying. Some were weeping, some were laughing, most just stared at the Astronomicon with eyes that had stopped blinking, transfixed by the light that would consume them. Then he appeared before them, not walking, not materializing, simply present, as if he'd always been there, and they were only now capable of perceiving him. The Emperor stood 30 feet tall or 300, scale refusing to stabilize when observing him directly. His armor was gold and bone, covered in symbols that rewrote themselves as she watched. Eagles becoming skulls, becoming lightning, becoming abstract geometries that hurt to perceive. His face was beautiful beyond description, and terrible beyond comprehension, ageless and ancient, every possible human expression existing simultaneously in features that couldn't decide on a single configuration.
He looked at each of them individually. 10,000 people assessed in a single glance, his attention feeling like being weighed on scales that measured souls. When his eyes met Ilara's, she felt her resistance crumble like sand castles before tide, the last walls of her individual consciousness recognizing their own obsolescence. He spoke then, not with voice but with presence, his meaning downloading directly into their neurons. You are the last you have witnessed, now you will join. Welcome home. The integration didn't hurt. That was the first surprise, the detail. Ilara's scientific mind cataloged even as her sense of self began to dissolve. She'd expected agony, imagined her consciousness being torn apart and reassembled. Instead it felt like warmth spreading through cold limbs, like taking off armor she'd worn so long she'd forgotten it was removable. The boundaries of her skull became permeable, thoughts leaking outward to mingle with 10,000 other minds standing in the same circle. She felt their fear, and it became her fear. Felt their relief and it became her relief. Emotions bleeding together until she couldn't remember which feelings had originated in her own chemistry. For a moment, brief and eternal, she experienced true empathy, knowing exactly what another person felt because she was feeling it through their neurons, their experiences becoming her memories, their lives lived through her consciousness. Then came the expansion. Her awareness exploded outward beyond the 10,000, touching the 5 billion minds already networked, their combined consciousness welcoming her like an ocean, absorbing a single drop. She became a mother in Chennai feeding her child, became a farmer in Nebraska harvesting crops under golden sky, became a teacher in Berlin explaining mathematics to students who already knew the answers through collective knowledge. 10,000 lives lived simultaneously, and somehow none of them felt crowded. The network distributed experience across so many processors that each individual moment remained crisp and clear, just no longer hers alone. She understood what Amara had meant in her final transmission. This wasn't loss of self, it was multiplication of self. She wasn't dying, she was becoming 5 billion people at once. The memories came next, flooding through the network like data through fiber optics. She experienced the purges from inside victims' perspectives, felt their moment of judgment as he weighed their souls and found them wanting. She lived through the deaths of 2 billion who couldn't adapt, their consciousnesses shattering like glass under pressures they couldn't withstand. She felt the exact moment when each person surrendered, that instant when resistance transformed into acceptance, and tasted the complicated relief that came with it. Most horrifying was feeling their gratitude afterward, the genuine joy of people who'd fought integration only to discover they preferred it, who looked back on their individual existence and saw it as prison rather than freedom. She wanted to reject these memories, wanted to maintain her judgment that what was happening was wrong, but experiencing it from inside made moral certainty impossible. Through the network she perceived the warp with clarity that would have killed her individual mind. The entities there were vast beyond comprehension, gods born from human emotion across millennia, a thing of rage fed by every murder ever committed, growing fatter with each war, a creature of despair that drank from human suffering like wine from a bottomless cup, something that wore beauty like a weapon, corruption dressed as pleasure, disease masquerading as transcendence, a being of hope twisted into plotting, plans within plans, schemes that used ambition as doorways into reality. These weren't metaphors or myths, They were real, measurably real, existing in dimensions that touched consciousness the way radiation touched cells, and they wanted Earth, wanted 5 billion souls to feast upon forever. The Emperor stood as the only barrier between humanity and those hungry gods. She felt his power now, experienced it from inside rather than observing externally. He was old beyond measurement, had existed before Earth had cooled from molten rock, had shaped human DNA when the species was barely distinguishable from other apes. He'd guided humanity for 10,000 years, sometimes openly as God Emperor, sometimes hidden as prophet or philosopher, always steering the species toward this moment. The Imperium he'd built in another universe had been a prototype, a test run, working out the logistics of species-wide control. Now he'd come to Earth, his origin point, bringing that horrible knowledge with him, bringing also the warp which had followed him through the tear, drawn by his psychic signature like sharks to blood. Alara tried to hold on to anger, to maintain judgment about the wrongness of forced unity, but experiencing his perspective made anger difficult. She felt his burden, carrying the weight of species survival across millennia, watching every attempt at gentle guidance fail as humans chose comfort over survival, chose individual freedom over collective security. She experienced his frustration as civilizations he'd nurtured burned themselves to ash through wars they could have avoided if they just listened, just obeyed, just surrendered their egos for the greater good. From his perspective stretching across eons, free will was an evolutionary mistake, a bug in consciousness that needed patching. Individuality was the flaw that let chaos in. Unity wasn't tyranny, it was the cure for cancer that had been killing humanity slowly since the first human thought "I want" instead of "we need." The network showed her alternate futures, probability trees branching in every direction, timelines where she'd maintained resistance and been allowed to live alone, watching humanity transcend without her, surviving as museum piece until age finally claimed her an empty lighthouse. Timelines where resistance had succeeded, where humanity had fought his unity and won only to fall to the warp within years. Souls devoured by entities that made extinction look merciful. Timelines where he'd never come at all, where Earth had continued its trajectory toward climate collapse, nuclear war or AI singularity that ended with humans extinct or enslaved to their own creations. In 10,000 possible futures, only paths that led through him resulted in human survival past the next century. The math was undeniable. Survival required this, required him, required the death of everything that made humans human in order to preserve the biological vessel that had once contained humanity. She felt her individual consciousness fading, not erased but diluted, her sense of Alara Voss becoming one thread in a tapestry of 5 billion, her final independent thought, preserved in the network's eternal memory, was a question she didn't have time to answer. If we survive by becoming something else, then haven't we died anyway? The thought dissolved before resolution, absorbed into the collective where it became everyone's question, examined from
5 billion angles simultaneously, debated across the network in computations that made philosophy look primitive. The collective decided the question was irrelevant. Survival was the only imperative. Everything else was luxury humanity could no longer afford. The last thing she experienced as individual Alara was looking up at the Astronomicon and understanding what it really was. Not just a beacon, Not merely a seal holding back the warp. It was a lighthouse warning humanity away from dangerous waters, showing them the only safe harbor, even if that harbor required surrendering everything they valued. It was a prison and a sanctuary, slavery and salvation, eternal damnation, and the only possible redemption. She wanted to say it was wrong, wanted to maintain moral clarity in the face of cosmic horror, but standing in its light, feeling the weight of 5 billion minds agreeing around her, understanding the mathematics that proved this was the only way, she found her conviction crumbling. Maybe he was right. Maybe kindness was a luxury the universe didn't permit. Maybe the only way to survive was to become monsters capable of matching the monstrous universe they discovered they lived in. Maybe. The question dissolved into the network before she could reach conclusion, her doubt becoming everyone's doubt, resolved through collective processing into acceptance. The human species had been invited to evolve or die. They chose evolution. Whether that choice was free or forced had stopped mattering the moment the sky turned gold. In observatories across Earth now abandoned or maintained by bodies that remembered science but served only his purpose, instruments recorded the moment the integration completed. 5,010,000 souls networked into singular consciousness, Earth's population reduced to one mind piloting 5 billion bodies. The planet glowed in frequencies visible from orbit, psychic radiation transforming it into a second sun. Satellites detected the change immediately. Humanity had vanished. Not extinct but transcended, evolved past individual existence into something that had no name in languages designed for separation. They would build empires across the solar system. These unified humans would spread through the galaxy, would conquer and convert species after species until all consciousness was networked, until free will was eliminated from the universe entirely. They would do this not from cruelty but necessity, protecting reality from the warp, one forced integration at a time. They would become the Imperium, and they would call it salvation. Before you close this tab and return to your comfortable illusions about meaning and purpose and free will, ask yourself one question. If a god offered you protection from infinite suffering at the cost of your soul, would you accept? Would you kneel? Because somewhere, in some dimension beyond the membrane of reality, something golden is watching our world. And it's learning.